Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Hannah. Yes, I'm Kamal Ahmed. I'm the BBC's economics editor. Obviously, the Daily Mail, a big fan of the BBC, and we'll be going through. I just dug out before I arrived here this evening a few of the headlines about the august organisation that I work for. Over recent weeks, these have been some of the stories in the Daily Mail about the BBC. BBC spends less than half of its cash on programmes. Critics demand inquiry into staggering waste, as it is revealed that £230,000 a year of licence fee money was spent on tea. This was followed up by unfortunate choice of headgear. A very good story, Roger. Singer Cerys Matthews is blasted for presenting the BBC's One Show, Item 1 Watership Down, while wearing a rabbit fur hat. Rabbit is the controversial word there, which is always usefully capped up by the Daily Mail to make sure people are across what's important. And then finally on Top Gear, it's the BBC's new Dream PC lineup. New Top Gear host revealed, and the internet is quick to notice there's a black guy, a woman, and a foreigner, and of course, a ginger. So that clearly pushed who we chose for Top Gear. But, and this is often totally missed about the Daily Mail can also surprise, and often does. We were all reading our Daily Mail today. Obviously, I have my copy that I read every day. And their final little editorial, from which we took great heart, reads this. These are words you might not expect in the Mail. But congratulations to the BBC. On its even-handed coverage of the referendum debate, brackets so far. Yes, it must be an effort for the corporation staff to suppress their prejudices and be fair to the Brexit camp. But 6 days into the campaign, they're doing a grand job. Let's see if they can keep it up for the next 17 weeks. So, it is often and clearly rather caricatured, the Daily Mail, in how it covers the world around it. The Daily Mail makes big and important arguments that actually it is simply the chattering metropolitan classes, probably most of them are sat here today, that dislike the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail speaks for a part of Britain that is often ignored by organisations the Daily Mail tends to dismiss as part of that elite. And we really want to get into that debate here. Clearly, the title of the debate or the motion we are arguing is "The trouble with this country is the Daily Mail." We will hear from all our panellists, both for and against this motion. And then, I hope this is not too complicated. I'm slightly scared this is going to be a sort of hanging Chad's American presidential election type of issue, but a relatively simple, I hope, voting process, which I think you've all engaged in when you arrived today. And there will be a chance to vote again when you've been totally persuaded against your initial opinions by this august panel. And it involves tearing this thing apart and sticking it in a ballot box, which will race around the audience once we've heard all the contributions and have a little bit of toing and froing on the panel. So let's kick off. And we are going to kick off with the Reverend Richard Coles. Reverend, if you could make your way to the podium. He is the presenter of the Radio 4 show Saturday Live. He's a parish priest and a former member, of course, of the Communards, and the only vicar in the UK to have had a #1 hit. So that's absolutely super. He was one of the inspirations for the BBC comedy Rev, and is the author of Fathomless Riches, or How I Went from Pop to Pulpit. Reverend, or Richard, if I can call you that, you have between 9 and 10 minutes, and I'm going to be tapping on this glass if you go over. Okay. You are speaking for the motion, "The trouble with this country is the Daily Mail."
Thank you very much. Well, that was an easy gig. I feel I should be regaling you with tales of my travels in the Hindu Kush, but not this time. Nice venue. Thank you very much, Kamal, for inviting me to be here. And I suppose I have to say that my relationship with the Daily Mail might be characterised as bittersweet. I grew up in the Middle England that the Daily Mail so volubly claims to represent. I'm from Kettering. You don't really get much more Middle England than that. And grew up in the 1970s in a little satellite village called Barton Seagrave near Kettering, where, I can tell you, the first newspaper I ever took was indeed the Daily Mail. My father took the Daily Telegraph, my mother took the Daily Mail, I took Whizzer and Chips, and graduated from that to my mother's newspaper instead. I liked the Nigel Dempster column, and I liked the cartoons, which was my sort of gateway drug, if you like, into the editorial. So the Daily Mail was a kind of fixture of our family life, and my introduction to the magical world of newspapers and everything that newspapers did. But then things took a different turn. My father was a shoe manufacturer in England in the days when shoe manufacturing went on, and that, of course, collapsed in the 1970s. An economic catastrophe that coincided with my own realization that I was not as other boys, or not as some of the other boys anyway, which had crystallized around a kind of ineradicable attraction to the handsomest boy in the school called Matthew Gamage, whose father read The Guardian. This necessitated various shifts and changes in my life, not least was abandoning the Daily Mail for The Guardian myself as a way of getting close to the obscure object of my desire. One thing led to another. I went to a minor public school, and my career there ended under something, well, actually ended literally under a cloud, caught smoking once too often. And so adolescence coincided with some dramatic and far-reaching changes in life. The collapse of shoe manufacturing and the future that would have brought me, and the realization of being gay and the future that brought me, which basically meant going to London in 1980, where I arrived aged 18, having been knocked off my bicycle with £2,000 in criminal injuries compensation. The first thing I did was get my ears pierced. The second thing was buy TCP to deal with the infection that followed. But I very quickly became, rather from, I suppose, a natural constituent of the Daily Mail readership, I became its exact opposite. London in those days was a very polarised place. Margaret Thatcher's government just settling in nicely at Westminster. And on the other side of the Thames, Red Ken, as the Daily Mail used to call him, representing everything that was contrary and different. And into that I was pitched, that polarised London, as a young gay man trying to find his way. To be a young gay man in the 1970s, early 80s in England was not the breeze that it might be today. I say a breeze, it's not always a breeze for many now. But it was quite a tricky thing to be, and one of the reasons for that was the public mood was very much coloured by the kind of images of gay people that the Daily Mail would deal in. So the twilight, miserable world of the homosexual was a familiar trope in journalism. In fact, rather an enduring one in the Daily Mail, I have to say. I'm sure I'm not the only person here who remembers Jan Moyer's column discussing the death of Stephen Gately, a young gay man who sang in Boyzone and who died at a tragically early age. Not of the twilight world of the homosexual, as it turned out, but of natural causes. Jan Moyer's piece didn't really make that distinction and appeared before his funeral. And I think it caused the greatest number of complaints ever made as a result of a piece of Daily Mail journalism, 25,000, as I recall. Quite a figure. So that was kind of typical, I suppose, the Daily Mail's attitude to people like me. And of course, not just people like me, its attitude towards all sorts of minorities has been robustly confrontational, we might say, from its earliest days. This was, of course, the newspaper which published the Zinoviev letter in 1924, I think it was. It was, of course, the newspaper that supported the black shirt. So it did have form, I say, in lining up with people who I was hardly likely to find politically congenial. And I remember it in the 90s very much, as I suspect many people here do, as being a sort of rallying cry, a sort of standard for the kind of values which, if I knew anything, I knew I was totally opposed to. Added to that, of course, its journalism was robustly close to the border of fiction, indeed well over into the border of fiction itself. The Daily Mail has produced countless stories, numberless stories, which have proved on rigorous inspection, or even cursory inspection, not to be absolutely in line with actuality. You might put it that way, I suppose. Far too many to me. I mean, from the ridiculous about, do you remember there was a primary school which refused to give children water on the hottest day of the year because it was Ramadan? Totally made-up story. And so many stories like that which call into question the veracity and the reliability of its journalism. That perhaps is another issue. I suppose its kind of full-blooded pursuit of a political, social and cultural agenda that I personally found uncongenial is the reason why the Daily Mail became, for me and for many like me, a sort of symbol of everything that we deplored. And of course that feeling was mutual, I think. It wasn't long before the Daily Mail gave me some of its treatment. I remember being in a gay pop band trying to bring down neoliberal economics with disco. Did not always draw the most flattering coverage from the Mail's columnists or indeed its editorial pages. Also being an out gay person around the time of Clause 28, later Section 28, and being involved in the activism opposed to that drew the Mail's attention too. And I think we felt particularly vulnerable, like most young gay men of that time, around the middle 80s when HIV arrived and had such a huge impact on the lives of people like me, which made us feel particularly vulnerable. And one of the reasons we felt vulnerable was because the animus that drew from the wider population was an animus that was indeed stoked, I think, by the Daily Mail. Not just the Daily Mail. I think newspapers together combined to do that. And that was a particularly uncomfortable feeling. Politically, I suppose it's just a truism to observe that dogs chase cats. Of course, the Daily Mail was going to go for people like me. Later on, after my incarnation as a clergyman, which I think rather startled the Daily Mail insofar as it noticed me at all, the Daily Mail rather too readily, in my view, describing itself or thinking of itself as the kind of natural ally of Church of England parsons, or a certain kind of Church of England parson, perhaps. And with its a constant appeal to family values, an appeal which sometimes is difficult to sustain when you look to either side of the text on your screen and notice its fascination with the 17-year-old bodies of the children of celebrities in their bathing costumes. But anyway, I digress. You know what I mean. So I remember I was asked to conduct the funeral for Mo Molan, which I did, which got an unfavourable piece in the Mail. I think the Mail really wanted to attack Mo, but this was not long after, I think it was Linda Lee Potter wrote a very unkind piece about Mo in which she described her physically in unflattering terms. I think charitably unaware that Mo had been receiving treatment for the cancer that was later to kill her. Mo was, of course, a very popular person, and so I think criticism that might have been directed to her was deflected to me as this appalling clergyman who betrayed the entire Christian tradition by conducting her funeral. That was sort of quite unpleasant. Later on, there was the appearance of my memoir. I had this odd, again, the bittersweet experience. The memoir was extravagantly praised by a book critic on the books page, and then I was absolutely taken apart on a page in the same edition by somebody else as representing this deplorable person. Strangely double feeling, actually, because quite often if you're being monstered by the Mail, and I was never really monstered by the Mail, not important enough and perhaps not deplorable enough, but there was almost a sort of grudging admiration that I read between the lines at the same time, perhaps for providing easily such reliable copy. I'm not sure about that. I may just be insulating myself against its barbs. And then most recently, I'm on the board of a housing association, and when the government announced its plans for the Queen's speech to impose right to buy on housing associations, I commented on that, asking by what right the government thought it could dispose of assets which were not in public ownership. Some of them originated in public ownership, but quite a lot of them, in fact, were bought by housing associations going to the city and raising finance themselves. I thought that was an interesting argument. And the Mail's approach was that I'd accused anyone who bought their council house of being a thief. This caused rather a great number of messages on my answering machine, most of them anonymous, and some of them from my parishioners. I don't particularly mind being monstered by the Daily Mail, but it is inconvenient to have to sort of pick the parish reaction, if you like, to it. But again, so what? as I said, dogs chase cats. It doesn't really matter. And I might find the Daily Mail objectionable. I might even find it loathsome, but I would absolutely defend its right to be objectionable and loathsome, and I'm glad it's there. I suppose the reason why I'm really speaking for this motion is something slightly different, and that is its claim to speak for Middle England. I don't think it does. I don't think it's the champion of Middle England. I don't think it articulates the fears and hopes of Middle England, as you, Peter, have said it does. I think it stirs the nightmares of Middle England. And I know this because I'm a Middle Englander myself. I'm the vicar of a Middle English parish. I live the life, I walk the walk, I talk the talk. Unlike the Mail's editor, famously who's got his finger on that pulse, with his grouse moor and his boys at Eton and his house in Belgravia and his other house in Sussex. Or Lord Harmsworth, who's not even he's not even in England, let alone Middle England. So how he can claim to speak to it, I don't really know. I think I do know a bit about Little England, and what I do know is that it's a much kinder, more generous, more tolerant, and nicer place than the Middle England stirred up by the Daily Mail and its journalism. I think it stirs it up. I think it agitates its nightmares. I think it produces a kind of noxious fume of distrust and unkindness, and one in which joy and generosity wither and die. And that is why I think the trouble with Britain is indeed the Daily Mail.
Thank you very much, Richard. Fabulous opening. I obviously mustn't clap because I have no opinions being from the BBC. But next up is one of Britain's finest editors, Roger Alton, former editor of The Independent and The Observer. Just for full disclosure, a man I used to work for when I was at The Observer as political editor and head of news. He was also executive editor of The Times and writes a regular sports column for The Spectator. He is now indeed a senior executive at the Daily Mail. Roger, speaking against the motion, the trouble with this country is the Daily Mail.
Thanks so much. I'm about as junior as you could possibly get at the Daily Mail. It's just very, very interesting, if you love newspapers, to be at a place like that, which is so focused, driven, powerful, successful. It's unbelievably interesting if you care about your industry. It's also a very fine newspaper. Very, very interesting listening to Richard, who can certainly dish it out, but in a very nice way, as befits a man who presents on the Swedish-natured programmes on radio. I read the piece you referred to, Richard, in the publication of your book. I remember reading it at the time, and I reread it the other day, and I thought, what a really nice, open, frank guy you come out of it as. I mean, you might have felt differently. I thought you came out of it absolutely terrifically. Just, if I may, for a moment, on the Gately case, that was an opinion piece by one of our columnists, and I think columnists, as Richard said, have a right to say things. There were, I think, 2 complaints, and then the remaining 24,998 were generated as a sort of a Twitter storm. I doubt whether anybody had actually read it. Truly, I mean, is that a loss of content? Anyway, that's what I suspect. Let me just tell you this. I mean, I've always loved papers. When I was a student about 100 years ago, I edited a student paper, and we had a small printing slot at about 2 a.m. on the presses of the Swindon Advertiser. And the roar and the thunder of those presses as they rolled stays with me still, even for our piddling little paper, Charwell. And it reminds me still of one of the best movies about journalism, Deadline USA. Humphrey Bogart's the editor of a crusading paper on the edge of going out of business. They go after organised crime despite threats. Then the best ever last line of the movie, Bogey's in the press room, and he holds up the phone. The press is raw, and he says, "That's the press, baby, the press." And there's nothing you can do about it, nothing. Now, sadly, I think there are a lot of people who do want to do something about the press, and they want to stop it. And I'm sure that the Rev Coles and Zoe Williams are not among their number, but just to make sure, I would hope that you would oppose this motion, because we need the press. I've sat in this great room many times seeing some of the people I most admire in the world, in fact, talk about their adventures, their exploits and their achievements. And it's something of a surprise to be here engaged in rebutting what, in my view, is a slightly bonkers notion. The trouble with Britain is the Daily Mail. The trouble with Britain, in my view, I'm sure it's not shared, but the trouble with Britain is it's not more like the Daily Mail. And the intelligence and the industry, the wit, the focus, the humour, the passion, the tolerance, yes, and the drive of the Daily Mail were taken up elsewhere in the country. We would be in a far better state. Truly, so if you don't want the country to be in a better state, then support the motion. The Mail, as I say, is a paper I've admired and enjoyed for years. A massive success story in a difficult, tight market. It's acclaimed by the public, by its readers, and by the industry. It's lavishly garlanded, endlessly being named Newspaper of the Year, wearingly so if you work for another paper. And the level of talent and ability runs extraordinarily deep. You have to take it from, I worked in a lot of papers, I've been fired from a lot of papers too. And it runs deeper than anywhere else I know. There's more women work, more women read it than any other paper in the country, and it has the best female journalists working there than anywhere in the country. And also the enforcement of journalistic ethics is incredibly high. It's something the editor and the senior staff care about. But it's also a paper with attitude. And that's what I love about it. It's raucous and it's rowdy and it's rambunctious and all these virtues I value. It's deeply anti-establishment. It speaks up for the common man. There I'd challenge what Richard says. It speaks up for the people who live outside the circle line. And it's wonderfully readable and always entertaining. And if you don't like any of that stuff, well, support Richard and Zoe. The papers of journalists are constantly being praised. The other day, the committee of MPs singled out the Mail and its investigations editor, Alton Former, for the highest standards of ethical investigative reporting. This was after their remarkable investigation into charity fundraising methods, i.e. the cold calling and bullying, and the investigation was triggered by the tragic death of a poppy seller in Bristol called Olive Cook. As a result of the Mail's work, the law has now been changed, and that treatment of the frail and the elderly can't go on. So if you want it to go on, then support Zoe and Richard. I think it should be stopped. And the other day, we launched a painstaking, meticulous investigation into the NHS's 111 service. It came after a tragic mother came to us. Her young boy had died of sepsis in the wake of the 111 giving completely false and ultimately fatal advice. And now the health service has just admitted that 111 is not fit for purpose when it comes to child sickness. It's a major result. It's a life-saving result. It's accomplished by the Mail. So if you don't like the fact that we started a campaign which saved lives, support the motion. It's a humane paper. It never forgets that most of us live ordinary lives, and it does stories that are of interest to us. Our readers, have their dreams, often unfulfilled, of a good education, a health service they can trust, believe in the family, in the country, in self-reliance. And they, like the paper, like myself, are profoundly suspicious of the state and the people who think they know best. And those are values that I support. We run campaigns on pensions fairness, the dangers of foreign ownership, grapple with tax-avoiding companies. We promoted Asian business through the Asian Business Awards. We reward women who combine motherhood with setting up their own businesses with Mumpreneur Awards, try and say that after a glass of wine. We champion British manufacturers and we've campaigned for the bereaved and their financial affairs. These are important matters, and if you don't care about them, as I say, give Richard and Zoe a work. It has a huge breadth of coverage, wider than any other paper I've worked for. It does more pro bono work than any other media organisation. We built a school in Sri Lanka after the tsunami, and its readers raised nearly £2 million for the flood victims in December. The families of the Omar victims, a long-running thing, 20 years on, have singled out the paper in gratitude for the money we raised. If you don't like the sound of that, they're people dipping into their pockets to help suffering misfortune. Well, you know what's going to come next. It publishes without fear or favour, without proprietorial interference. It's profoundly suspicious of the establishment. Not necessarily things you could say for all or many of our more liberal media organisations. I've worked for quite a few of them. We campaign remorselessly and successfully, always against injustice. We campaign long and hard for the release from Guantanamo of Shaka Amir, publicly thanked the paper. Gary McKinnon, you may remember him. He's an autistic guy, geek, hacked into the Pentagon. The US wanted to extradite him. He served a long time in jail. The paper stopped that, and proceedings here were halted. It was a 7-year campaign. We've campaigned on blocking child access to internet pornography, on the blanketing of the planet with plastic bags, rip-off prices for football matches. I mean, don't you care about any of this? I do care about it, and that's why I'm here to oppose this motion. But we don't take up a cause and drop it. We campaign incredibly vigorous. Nobody else does anything as vigorous as we do. We campaign for Britain's most neglected community, a thing called Dignity for the Elderly. We've led great popular campaigns for the NSPCC and for Alzheimer's Society, which is an organisation trying to deal with the greatest challenge of the century. I remember it was sneered at when it campaigned against round-the-clock drinking, when the Labour government introduced round-the-clock drinking and exploded gambling. Now those campaigns actually, I don't want to sound like the Bishop of Dulwich, but those campaigns have proved right, terribly right and precedent. Even Tessa Jowell apologised in the Times for the release of gambling. And again, if you think none of this matters, give Richard your vote. This is a country which is enshrined secrecy and leaps at the chance to curtail the freedom of the press with a whole variety of ways. But the Mail, and other papers, but the Mail particularly, shines a remorseless light into this dark world. And that's why so many people fear it, because it tells the truth. The freedom of the press is under unprecedented attack. There's a lot of things, the very abusive powers that the police are doing, police by the police, the Data Protection Act, which is being used by powerful individuals to suppress stories, no-win, no-fear agreements are punitive, and now there's a royal charter hovering in the background, threatening damages to force the press into state regulation. We're fighting against that, and I hope you would join us in that. There's also been a fierce and brilliantly handled campaign to prevent the erosion of the Freedom of Information Act. It was one of Tony Blair's great regrets that he introduced freedom of information, and now they're trying to row back on it. The editor's submission to the Independent Commission is a masterpiece of sort of passionate invective about an open society and freedom, the ability to scrutinise our masters. Civil servants don't like FOI, freedom of information, because Whitehall believes it should be exempt from scrutiny. They should remember, though, that with authority comes responsibility, and they should remember who pays their wages. Deep in our society is a presumption of civil servants and politicians that the workings of government should be kept secret. And last year, we're continuing to run a major investigation on the excessive pay and allowances in the public sector fat cats, absurd salaries being paid to university bosses, police chiefs, local authority officials. There's one NHS chief executive earning £1.25 million a year despite having a £4 million deficit and failing to meet any of his infection targets. There's a deputy chief constable, earning £750,000 a year, and council executives with £30,000 minor council executives £30,000 car allowances, so they can drive their Porsche to work. If you don't want this to be if you don't want any of this stuff to be exposed, support the motion. I think it should be. We've revealed a rip-off of rubbish pension annuities, and that led to the Chancellor's pension freedoms. We forced banks and building societies to be more transparent, and we revealed how Barclays had missold thousands of pounds of investments, and resulting in 67 million quid's worth of compensations. We pursued people across the world, and last week we won 130 grand for a woman dying of cancer. So we highlight the hypocrisy, the grand pay of these people who run these companies, the real impact of terrible government policies on people, and we can force these firms to change their ways. I don't think you should want companies to get away with these things, and I think you should stop them, and I think you should defeat this motion. So if you want secrecy, if you want to safeguard the rule of the unelected, and if you want power kept from the people, well, support the motion, but I couldn't until the day I die. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Roger. For the motion next, Zoe Williams, a columnist for The Guardian and The New Statesman. Obviously, The Guardian right up there in the Daily Mail's list of things it dislikes. She writes political commentary, interviews and reviews for the motion. The trouble with this country is the Daily Mail. Zoe, kick us off.
Thank you very much. I never know how long I've been speaking for. I always choose somebody in the front row and look at their watch. This time I've chosen you. So you have to have your watch visible to me, otherwise I will literally go on all night. I'm probably the only journalist over 40 in the country who still does vox pops, where you have to go up to strangers and ask them a question. It's frankly a young person's game, because people will say anything to a young person, whereas when I go up to them, they think I'm from the council, and they're really scared. and it takes a lot of warming them up, and I often have to choose ones who already look quite eccentric, because it will be quite an eccentric act to talk to me. So last week I went to Uxbridge. I think my stated purpose was to find out whether they thought Boris Johnson was in or out of Europe, since Boris Johnson at that point didn't know, and since half of them didn't know they were in his constituency, and since nobody seemed to care, which is something for both campaigns to worry about, but I'm not worried about it. It was quite an interesting piece, but in the course of which I had quite an interesting conversation with a couple of people. So I went up to this one guy who was dressed in kind of tweeds like Doctor Who. I thought, you'll be good. Whatever you say, you'll be good. And he was Canadian, and I said, what do you think of the EU? And he said, I think immigration is out of control. And I said, oh, right, because you don't sound like you're English. And he said, yeah, it's not people like me I'm worried about, right? No, of course not. It's these people who come over and they don't work, they've got no intention of working, they have a bunch of kids, and they just expect us all to pay for them. And I was like, okay, because if you're really lazy and you never want to work, can I just say the last thing you should do is have a bunch of kids? It's the hardest work known to man. It's harder than any job and more boring. And one of them is harder than a full-time job. A bunch of them is like doing 7 full-time jobs, 24 hours a day. It's just absolutely nightmarish. That's just an aside. The internal logic of this bugbear doesn't work, but you hear it quite a lot. Anyway, he said, this is sad, actually. He goes, I said, why do you think those people exist? Why do you think people exist who don't want to work and never want to work, but will uproot themselves and their families and travel halfway across the world just to live in a country where they can have a bunch of kids and make somebody else pay for them? I mean, why would you think that? And he said, well, it's kind of scaremongering. You don't really know what to believe. The media is so scaremongering. And I was like, well, duh. Maybe you should try not believing it. But I didn't say that because obviously you're vox popping, right? You already look like you're from the council. He said, the thing is, I've stopped mocking him and started taking him seriously. You can tell because I've stopped doing a Canadian accent. He said, the thing is, I had lymphoma, and I've been living here for 8 years. I was doing a degree in the traditional music of the Oman. I'm actually not joking. This is true. I've been here 8 years. I was socially useful. And I got 200 quid a week. And I had lymphoma. And I was thinking, well, 2 things. Firstly, you obviously feel really precarious. That obviously really made you feel insecure and threatened and was horrible for you, and it's kind of led you to demonize other people. The second thing is, the Daily Mail would have a field day with you. You come over here studying your liberal nonsense that can't get you a job, get your blood cancer, and then the NHS has to pay for it, and you want money as well. The NHS would actually tear you. I mean, not the NHS, the Daily Mail. I'm against the Daily Mail, not the NHS. The Daily Mail would have you for breakfast. They would have you on toast. Obviously, I didn't say any of that. I said, that's really sad. Are you better now? And he said, yeah, I am better now because the NHS is great. And I said, yes, it is. Anyway, this is a kind of particular bugbear of the Daily Mail's, the kind of the hyper-fertile, congenitally idle immigrant. And the Sun has its own kind of problems with immigrants. They don't like the ones who shoot you in the head and blow themselves up. But only the Daily Mail has this kind of casual demonization of every immigrant you see. Everyone you see who looks a bit foreign has different cultural values to you because they don't believe in work and they don't believe in responsibility and they don't believe in self-care and they don't believe in looking after their own. And it's just a kind of absolutely ceaseless demonization of a group of people, and it's an othering of a group of people. And it plays particularly well with people who are kind of insecure for reasons maybe of their own good health or their economic circumstances. Now, it's what Jean-Paul Sartre always called a classic bad faith argument. When if you kind of are insecure, if you are worried about the future, if you are kind of suffering, and this suffering mainly is economic, actually, in the kind of bad faith scheme, instead of considering or thinking deeply about what's made you kind of put you in that position, and what you are worried about the future, and which bit of the future is worrying you, which bit of your work is worrying you, which bit of your wages aren't livable. Instead of worrying about all of that and kind of trying to correctly identify the source of your precariousness, you just project all your anxieties onto this kind of demon other. And historically, Europeans have always used anti-Semitism. The Daily Mail is no stranger to that, of course. But British othering, British kind of bad faith arguments, projecting anxieties onto kind of demon others who aren't like us, who are different, actually is quite agile and can attach itself to any foreigner. And that's, I think, both maximised and kept alive by the Daily Mail. They just absolutely love to make these arguments where some other person isn't like you, they're out to get you, they want to freeload off you, they don't think like you, they don't have the same sympathies as you. And it plays particularly well, obviously, with people who are insecure, and what it does is just drives a wedge between them. So there's no trust, there's no solidarity, and there's no kind of working towards anything better. There's no sense in which you could build something together, even across your differences, and actually make your future safer together. So it kind of fosters a sense of misery and atomization and suspicion, which is, sad. It's not just sad, it prevents meaningful solutions. It makes sure the future will be insecure because you're preventing a meaningful solution and people coming together to talk about meaningful solutions. So it's no joke, Just because they sometimes are right about some things doesn't mean they're not actually creating a really poisonous atmosphere between the citizens of this country who need to work together. Anyway, so the next guy I spoke to, this is going to sound like I'm making them up, and I'm really, really not. These are all real people. He said, the problem with the EU is these Somalians, I didn't say they're not in the EU, because as I say, it's a vox pop, right? I'm completely neutral. I'm like Kamal in this. These Somalians, they come over here. They've got 1.3 million pound houses, and they kind of soak them all up. I can't afford a 1.3 million pound house. There might be veterans who need that house but are living on the street, which is true. There might be English people who need that house but are living in B&Bs, which is true. Now, the problem with the Canadian having his political mobilisation leached out by the suspicion and grey-wash of the Daily Mail, it's not the end of the world, right? It's not the end of the world if people aren't on the streets campaigning for better treatment of people with lymphoma for the time that they've got it. So that's a kind of niche issue, and I wouldn't kind of nail my flag to it. This isn't niche at all. The fact that a house in London is worth £1.3 million and a family who needs social housing might well live in that house, which they could never in a million years afford. That isn't a niche issue, that's a very real issue. And there are very good reasons why that gentleman could not get that house, and there are very good reasons why that gentleman could never afford that house on his salary. There are good reasons why he'll never be eligible for social housing. There are good reasons why social housing is kind of collapsing before our eyes. None of these reasons have anything to do with Somalia or Somalians or Somalis, which is, Twitter tells me, the correct way to address people from Somalia. There are perfectly good reasons everywhere you look for a situation in which the bottom, probably 70% of people living in the southeast can no longer afford their housing. And these people need to start talking to each other. And some of them will come to Marxist conclusions, which I've come to, about use value and exchange value. And some of them will come to other conclusions about supply and demand and rent capping and everything else. There are lots and lots of solutions that we will talk about and discuss. We will not talk about and discuss them while we're blaming a family of Somalians for living in a £1.3 million house. We will not ask deep and searching questions about land value while we're trying to paint that as a greedy thing of a Somalian to do, to have the temerity to want to live under a roof in a city where house prices have completely peeled away from any meaningful wage. So this is, sucking the life out of a kind of political mobilization, and it's frankly sucking the life out of any intelligence. You want to live in a mature democracy where people can have intelligent conversations in which the world is standing on its feet and not on its arse. You want to live in a world where people are able to discuss problems in a way that at least resembles reality. And when you have this kind of thumping drumbeat of nonsense, which plays so well with people who feel themselves rightly to have been done over by the society they're living in. 1 minute, because I'm not going to get onto my horse fetus in that case. But I'm just going to leave that hanging. When I was young, the Daily Mail used to pit women against one another. It was like constant working mother, non-working mother, barren slag versus Hausfrau, and it was constantly a constant barrage of unpleasantness. And again, it was the same kind of bad faith argument. It was leveraging women's anxieties against one another and trying to make us hate each other. And it did a really good job until Mumsnet came along, actually. And I spent my whole youth fulminating about it. But now I look back, it wasn't actually that important because we weren't in this situation. We weren't in this kind of very precarious financial times when people felt really, really separated and divorced from one another. Now it really has got serious, and so have they. And they talk about people on benefits as though they're vermin, literally vermin. And they talk about people who've migrated against in fear for their lives, as though they're just after the milk off your doorstep. And it's really sucking the lifeblood out of the way we are with one another, and it's sucking our ability to build something better. So vote for us, okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zoe. Final speaker against the motion, thank you, Zoe. Peter Oborne, political columnist on the Daily Mail, associate editor of the Spectator, former chief political commentator of the Daily Telegraph. Just for full transparency, I worked with Peter at the Daily Telegraph. Obviously, this is a stinking media elite actually up here, probably much hated by the Daily Mail. His books include The Rise of Political Lying and The Triumph of the Political Class. Against the motion, the trouble with this country is the Daily Mail. Peter.
Thank you very much, Kamal. It's first of all to say thank you very much for allowing me to be here, because I've working for the Daily Mail. There is a category of person who regards you as beyond the pale. I used to live in Islington, and really people would come up and start denouncing me in the streets. It was quite hard living. It's full of Guardian people, Alan Rusbridger just down the road and so forth. And obviously I was in enemy territory, but it was difficult. People would pass at you, and they knew automatically that because you wrote for the Daily Mail, you were a terrible person, the devil incarnate. And so I'm grateful to have I know that there are people who aren't going to be fully convinced, but just make the case that the Daily Mail is a good thing, a moral paper which has made the world a better place, which I'm proud to work for. We've had two versions of critique this evening, and I'm just going to divide them into, basically, I think we've just heard from Zoe Williams a political rant. She doesn't like the politics of the Daily Mail. We understand that, but I didn't get a sense that this was a criticism of the Daily Mail. It was just a criticism of a set of policies. And I'm not going to deal with that very seriously, because I think this is about the Daily Mail, not about a vision of how Britain should be. If Rev Coles is correct in his very moving speech that he made, then I would be ashamed to work for the Mail. If it was a paper which was bigoted and targeted gays and other minorities, I would be ashamed. I don't recognise that paper. It's not the paper I work for, and I'm basically going to engage more with the Reverend Coles as a result. And I think my first criticism I'll make to Reverend Coles is that it's a generic criticism of newspapers. When people like me, Roger, were brought up in the 80s, it wasn't just newspapers, actually society at large had a terrible attitude towards gay people. And it wasn't just the Daily Mail. I don't know what Daily Mail wrote, but I know a lot about The Sun was terrible. You gays were demonised, and all papers, I suspect, did it. I don't know, but mercifully that's changed. That no longer happens, and there are other minorities who get demonized, Muslims in particular. I don't believe that the Daily Mail is a terrible offender on that front. All papers do it a bit. Some papers do it a lot. And I just, Roger said something very wise. The paper is a tolerant paper, and I'm going to come on to that. If you attack the Daily Mail, you're attacking its readers. It's got 1.6 million people buy it every day. It's read by about 5 or 6 million people every day. If you're going to say the Mail's bad, you're attacking those people for buying the Mail. And I'm going to say that you mustn't, well, rather, I think you've got to think about why you're doing that. 'Cause for me, they're very good people. They pay their 65p. Zoe works for a paper which costs £1.80. I believe the Times costs about the same. The Telegraph, £1.40. The Financial Times, £2.70. They're paying 65p. They're not well-off people, that's the first thing. They tend not to live in central London or university cities. They're struggling. They're middle-class, low-middle-class people. They have to watch every penny as a whole. And they don't live fashionable lives. And they really experience life at the sharp end. I think that they don't, as a whole, have a voice. I think George Orwell said, the lower middle class is the most despised category of person in Britain. Well, and they don't have a voice. And I think the Mail gives them that voice. And if you're saying the Mail's a bitter, nasty paper, you're saying they're a bitter, nasty paper. And I think you're making a class statement. I think it's okay to be upper middle class in this country, middle class, like most of the people. Okay to be rich, but if you're lower middle class, if you're struggling, no, it's not so okay. Let's just take that issue, which goes on about immigration. It's one of the things about the Daily Mail, which is so good, is that we write for our readers. Many newspapers, Times, Telegraph, I've watched them all, I know them all, they tend to write for each other. The columnists write columns which express the virtue of the columnist. It shows him a civilized version, a citizen of the world who has liberal views, utterly tolerant and marvelous. Of course he's in favour of immigration. He lives in a nice house, he's affluent, he probably went to a public school. Sometimes even she's a she, and very, very occasionally he or she is black. But that is the worldview. Now the Daily Mail is interested to the exclusion of everything else in its readers. And that is about 6 million people who read it. They don't go to fashionable parties and they experience the realities of immigration. They have the pressure on school places. They have the pressure on their wages. They're out of a job. In Eastern European migration has had a real effect on people's jobs. Now, if you're the fat cat in London, that's great, because you're getting cheaper labour. If you're the CBI boss, that's magnificent. Higher profits. You can drive you can drive down wages. And furthermore, you can be virtuous about it, because you're going to get applauded by the Guardian columnist for supporting immigration. But what about the person that Zoe is so sneery about? The person at the sharp end? The person who loses their job, or has the job cut, or suddenly finds that their school's completely changed its demography and there's loads of different languages, and you worry about it and you care about it, you are being sneered at. Now, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the Daily Mail was pretty well the only organ of opinion in Britain which raised the issue of immigration. I know it did that because I wrote some of those pieces. Now, personally, I'm not affected, except entirely. I love immigrants. I love immigration. I think it's fantastic. It makes Britain a much, much better place. But it really changes. If you are at the sharp end, are you not allowed to have a voice? The BBC would not go near this issue, because if it did, it would be racist to do so. And so there was a great lacuna of public debate. It was a great, it was something nobody polite could talk about. The Mail did, and of course, therefore, according to the liberal elite, who have such articulate opponents of mine, it's racist. It was never anything of the sort. It gave a voice to people whose lives were severely affected and were disenfranchised by papers which are read by prosperous and powerful and rich people. And that, oddly enough, includes The Guardian at £1.80 a shot. So we write for... We don't... That's one of the reasons... It's quite frustrating to write for the Mail. It's an odd thing that you can't make recondite references to clever books you've read because it's written for the readers. You tend not to go on... You don't very often see Mail people on TV and Newsnight because it's written for the readers. We don't show off to each other. We write for our readers, and that's another reason why almost everybody hates the Mail. Because we don't... I've been a political journalist for 20 years, and there's an awful, wretched collusion between political parties and journalists. The paper which doesn't do that is the Daily Mail. I remember once, actually, it was when I was on the Evening Standard, and Paul Dacre, the editor of the Mail, was there. I couldn't believe it. We were running some health story causing problems to the government, and Willie Waldegrave, the health secretary at the time, tried to ring up Dacre. Five times he rang up Dacre. He would not budge off the back bench where he was editing the paper. He wouldn't speak to the health secretary because he's interested in his readers, stories which affect the lives of their readers. He wasn't up to ingratiating. There's one ghastly exception. He got much too close to Gordon Brown. I couldn't understand what was going on. But basically, the Mail is anti-establishment because it stands up for unfashionable people. That makes it anti the Tory party, by the way. I'm allowed, by the way, I criticise George Osborne, particularly over some of the issues which Zoe Williams raised. Housing, the favouring of rich people. House price, very, very important issues. But we speak up for our readers on those issues because they affected more than anybody else. We speak up on family values. Yes, we do. We believe, we always have, we've always said it, we've been sneered at it, that two-parent families work really well. And actually, a lot of research has vindicated that. We believe there have been great problems with the welfare state, that it has encouraged a culture of dependency across generations. And actually, what we believe is that minimises the life chances. It makes people dependent. We want to give people to live really fulfilling lives. We're not against the welfare state, by the way, and that would be a misrepresentation.
1 minute, Peter.
Yeah.
1 minute.
And we've done, and I'll just tell one final story. Because we have that power, because we're so independent, we run these campaigns. Gary McKinnon. I brought that campaign in to the Daily Mail. I was rung up by Claire Algar at Reprieve. She told me about Gary McKinnon. I heard it. I rang up, spoke to the editor. I sent him a one-page note of all the big points. I got a call back half an hour later. We're going to a campaign on this. We ran 6 days later, the campaign started. You'd never seen anything like it. We stopped that boy going to the United States. It's one of the proudest. I feel really proud of that, and I can give you loads and loads of other examples. And so don't tell me it's... I'm just trying to tell you why I'm proud to write for the Daily Mail, and I don't recognise the distortion you've been given by two people who claim to be factually accurate. Rev Coles claimed to be factually accurate. No. It's a good paper.
Okay. Thank you very much, Peter. Before we come to this magnificent audience here, we're going to have just one chance, Richard, to make 1 point or ask one question of your opponents on this side, and I'll ask the same from here. So, Richard, 1 point that you want to rebut, just one, because time is tight, about either from what Peter said or what Roger said on their points against the motion.
I don't think that to speak in favour of this motion is to attack the readers of the Daily Mail. I think the Daily Mail attacks the readers of the Daily Mail. I have the greatest respect for the people you describe, Peter. They're my parishioners. I know them. I love them. It's where I come from. I share that life. I know how those virtues work. I know how they organise and marshal the everyday goodness that gives a heartbeat and a pulse and a life to a community. And I support that, and I think that's a terrific thing. Just a very second point is you talk about the Daily Mail's political independence. Wasn't David English knighted by Margaret Thatcher? Wasn't the Daily Mail for 20 years a staunch supporter of the Conservative Party? I'm glad it's not anymore if it isn't, but I'm not sure that that's an entirely one argument.
Roger, do you want to make one point? I saw you writing furiously during both Richard and Zoe's presentations, mostly swear words, actually. But do you want to make one quick rebuttal point about what you've heard from your two opponents?
Again, this sort of idea, there seem to be two strands Peter pointed out. One saying the paper is homophobic or implying it's homophobic. The other saying the paper is anti, if you like, foreigners. That's so not the case. The paper is the most open discussion anywhere that I've ever seen. The other day, Peter Tatchell, for example, has written loads of times in the paper. The other day in conference, Paul Dacre said, Peter Tatchell is a great man. I mean, it's a very, very tolerant organisation, I promise you. What's wrong with that?
Zoe,
I'm amazed.
Zoe, you've coloured the Daily Mail wrongly.
Both my opponents seem to have misunderstood me in about 100 different ways. I can only assume it's because I've got a high-pitched voice or something. I wasn't saying that it's the paper that's anti-foreigners, even though it is, and I wasn't objecting to a bunch of policies, even though I do object to a lot of policies. I was objecting to a set of caricatures, which actually doesn't limit itself to foreigners or immigrants or disabled people or benefits claimants or anything else. It's a set of caricatures that attaches itself to any weak spot that they think they can give a good kicking to. I think it's a paper of bullies. Now, you know, if you think that's me objecting to Conservative policies, you should hear me on Conservative policies. The other, just one tiny weeny point. Okay, yeah, they have done good campaigns. The Stephen Lawrence campaign was a good campaign. It was a meaningful and seismic campaign. We all do good campaigns. The argument, put up with any of the bile they spew because sometimes they do a good thing, I think is a poor argument.
Thank you, Zoe. Peter, one point you'd like to make in rebuttal, not repeating your argument, in rebuttal to what you heard.
The Reverend Coles, who accused his parishioners of Marxian false consciousness just now. I just want to pick him up on the point of David English, partly to say that, of course, it's not unknown for Labour to give knighthoods, but mainly to say, actually, that David English received a posthumous peerage, I'm almost certain I'm right,
you did.
As a gift from New Labour. So you'll get your facts. You were going on about Daily Mail being inaccurate. Can I just urge you occasionally to get your own facts?
Can I
straight?
No, Richard, no. The audience has waited patiently. Now, I have the first results as you walked in about this debate, which I'm going to read out now. So for the motion, the trouble with this country is the Daily Mail, 40%. Against, 27%. Undecided, 33%. So, lots to go for here. So now, dear audience, stick your hands up in the air. Let's have some questions, not lengthy perorations about X, Y, and Z, but there's a gentleman up there, or at least two people up there who I've seen immediately. If you could stand up and speak boldly, we can hear absolutely what you have to say to us. And then I think, was there a gentleman elsewhere there following? Yeah, it's very dark. Can the house lights slightly? Very dark.
Hello?
Hello, yeah, brilliant.
Okay.
Speak
Hi,
away.
my name is Miriam from Walthamstow Academy, Sixth Form. And my parents were foreigners, so I kind of know what it's like. I have points for and against, just to be a bit unconventional, because I know no one, or not a lot of people, will be against this. Just the first point, one of the speakers said that they speak for the people because they don't have a voice, which is kind of contradictory, because if you're giving them a voice, that means you're shaping their opinion. And just a second thing, being against immigration doesn't give you an excuse to kind of spout like hyperbolized nonsense. If you're going to be against immigration, you have a mature discussion about the pros and cons and come to some sort of solution. Just saying that it's a bad thing doesn't immediately resolve the issue that you think it is. But just to kind of talk about like more against the motion, I think neither side has addressed whether it is the media that shapes the opinion of people or whether the people shape what the media portrays. And I think once you can address that, you can talk about this as more of a legitimate issue. But if it is the media that shapes the people, or if it is the media that shapes the people, then you can criticize it. But if you can argue that the Daily Mail is simply delivering what people want to read, which is more a criticism of the social construct and the opinions and ideologies of people in these sorts of positions, rather than blaming what the Daily Mail is doing. Essentially, it could just be delivering what people want to hear, which is a legitimate argument on that side.
Fabulous, thank you very much. There's a gentleman, I think, to your left. No, oh, he's too nervous now, obviously. Who else? Hands up, hands up, hands up. Gentleman down here, and someone at the back there. Gentleman down here, lovely. Thank you. Sir.
Question specifically to Mr. Oborne. You famously resigned from the Daily Telegraph, citing interference from a combination of proprietors and advertisers in the editorial content of the paper. In the titles today that you see, including the Daily Mail, do you see that kind of interference, which would indeed be an argument to say that any newspaper that has that kind of interference perhaps should not? And you've joined the Daily Mail. What is your, how do you stand on the issue of the reason that you resigned from the Daily Telegraph compared with the Mail today?
Fabulous, thank you very much. And the gentleman at the back, and then we'll come back to the panel. I think, sorry, it's dark. It could be a woman at the back for all I know.
It is.
I saw a hand.
Don't worry, it is.
So sorry.
I have a question to Richard and Zoe. How do you explain the popularity of the Daily Mail? And to the other two, Richard Coles said something interesting about family values and the website, which has a lot of celebrities and scantily clad women and so on. Could you comment on that? How does that tie in with your highly regarded family values?
Fabulous. So hold on, just 1 second, Roger. So, Richard and Zoe, could I pick up with you this notion that the motion is the wrong way round. It should be the trouble with the Daily Mail is this country. That actually all the Daily Mail is doing, and its popularity reveals this, is reflecting the opinions of a very important constituency of the British people, which, if you were to close it or to get rid of it or to stop it doing what it's doing, would make these people voiceless.
Well, look, I mean, I think everybody's biconceptual, right? Everybody has strong authoritarian tendencies and strong nurturant tendencies. Everybody has strong optimistic tendencies and strong pessimistic tendencies. We're all sophisticated people, all of us, and I don't really hold with Peter's analysis that we despise the lower middle classes because we think the Daily Mail is bigoted, but leaving that aside, we've got impulses which are drawn out by different forms. So you listen to a very hopeful argument and you feel hopeful, you listen to a very pessimistic argument and you feel full of fear and suspicion. So, you know, both of those things are very kind of powerful. They're powerful triggers and they're very interesting. So you can read the Daily Mail and 50,000 ways you can get cancer just before you've even brushed your teeth. And it is powerful and it does kind of, it does draw you in, it is magnetic and it is engaging. But no, do I think the people who read that are suspicious, mean-minded, pessimistic, paranoid people? No, I think it's a suspicious, mean-minded, paranoid paper tapping into anxieties that we all have.
So is it which way round is it? Do we get the media we deserve?
No. You know, the Daily Mail has been playing on people's fears and dreads since it started, and it's just become less disciplined and less dignified and less sympathetic in the way it does it.
Sorry, thank you very much. Peter, this question here about the Telegraph and your public piece about what you said were commercial pressures which affected editorial in the Telegraph, particularly around HSBC. Peter, what has been your experience rejoining the Daily Mail, and how has that sort of coloured your opinion about the paper you now work for?
Well, just specifically on that, I see no evidence at all of any advertising effect on copy. Quite the opposite. It's incredibly robust and will not be bullied by advertisers. That, by the way, that's not unique to the Mail. The FT gave a glorious example of this a few days ago when Lucy Calloway wrote that piece about advertisers. So I'm not saying it's just the Mail, but certainly it's marvellous. It won't be intimidated by anybody.
Thank you, Peter. Richard, can we pick up again on this popularity issue? That your argument is fundamentally undermined by the fact that so many more people read the Daily Mail than read the papers you might more cleave to or think have a more honest opinion of the world around them.
Well, I don't think it undermines the argument. I think lots of people love the Daily Mail because it's a very, very good paper. It's brilliantly made, it's brilliantly edited, it's brilliantly put together, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that that's necessarily an expression of its virtue or its virtuous intent on its readers. I think it's a very compelling, very well-made newspaper. Unfortunately, like most clergymen of the Church of England, I stand in the pulpit with the Guardian up my cassock, preaching to a congregation of people who all bloody read the Daily Mail.
Which way round, Richard, would you put this argument about who creates the country we live in? Is it the media leading the docile, peasants of Britain towards opinions that it likes, or actually do the public buy it because it reflects them?
I think it's incredibly complex, that stuff. I don't think there's one easy way of setting that out or understanding the dynamics. I think it's subtle and complicated.
Okay. Roger. Scantily clad women. So this is the paper supposedly of family values. You'd spend any time online on the Daily Mail and you will get sort of shocking, borderline, critics would say, I'm from the BBC and have no opinions on this, critics would say, not me, borderline soft pornography to increase, it's basically clickbait. How can you stand as a paper of family values when you have teenage girls paraded around all the time on your sidebar of shame in their bikinis?
Well, there's quite a lot of good stuff today, by the way. But the only thing I would say about that, the people who criticise the Daily Mail, say, stand the Daily Mail, this, that, and the other, almost invariably, don't read it. But they will all read Mail Online. Now, Mail Online is a completely separate editorial operation. There's an overlap of copy of about maybe 15%, i.e. 15% of what's in the paper is on the website. The website is a huge, extraordinary operation, and now it's all over the world, Australia, India, it's amazing. And to see people operate is quite fantastic as a piece of sort of work. And you riffle down the sidebar of shame and you find quite amazing things, I tell you. But the other thing I would say...
But Roger, what about the point? What about the point, Roger? I've asked you a question. What about the point that it undermines your argument that you were making there? This is a paper of family values.
Well, it is a very big question. Then there could be, if there's a... Okay, here's the point. Here's the thing. The Daily Mail is actually a ferociously moral paper. It has a moral view of stuff.
Is the Daily Mail Online, then, the problem with this country? Is actually the Daily Mail Online?
The Mail is ferociously moral. Mail Online is absolutely amoral, which is why everybody loves it.
Is it ferocious? So, Mail Online is not ferociously moral?
You're telling me?
It isn't ferociously moral, no.
Mail Online is completely amoral. The Mail is a fantastically moral organisation. They're broadly not connected.
They're broadly not connected, despite they're the same company running...
Can I come in? Let's come up. Look, we need just to sort something out.
Yeah.
What we are debating
more questions.
What we're debating here is about the Daily Mail. That's what I understood. Now, if we were debating the Times, we wouldn't suddenly find ourselves defending the Sun, except that we're in the same stable. I just to sort of educate people.
So you're saying the Mail Online has that relationship with the Mail in the same way the Sun has with the Times?
It's completely separate editorial, separate editor, separate market, and likewise, by the way,
doesn't it undermine your argument though about family values having the Daily Mail online?
We're talking about. Sorry, I want to be very clear. We're talking about the Daily Mail.
Okay.
I came here to defend that. The Mail on Sunday is, again, a completely different editor, different operation, different readership. Likewise, the Daily Mail. And you're just in a sort of intellectual muddle if you suddenly start saying the Sun and the Times is the same thing.
But they have scantily clad women, often young women, in the Daily Mail paper as well.
All right. So look, welcome to newspapers.
Okay. More questions. We're also. Hang on. We're going to have more questions. A gentleman there. Hands up. Come on. We're here to have a big debate here. There's a gentleman over there. And
there's one up there.
Someone over there. A lady called, and then a bloke put his hand up.
It's
How
that one
bizarre!
there.
Up there. Right. Sorry. Are there mics up there? Fabulous. Sorry, I've completely forgotten who I came to. Who did I point out?
It was that gentleman
Gentleman over there. So sorry.
Hello. It's going to sound like Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is James Bartholomew, and I used to work for the Daily Mail.
We're going to start the vote as well quite soon, so start ripping up your tickets.
And I want to back up Peter Oborne's point that you don't actually work for a newspaper, you work for an editor. And these references to the Daily Mail in the past, pre-war, are pretty well irrelevant, because it's the editor who shapes a paper, and Paul Dacre is the editor that I worked for, and he is undoubtedly the most successful editor of our times. But more importantly to me, when I was working there in the early 1990s, he provided a newspaper, one of only 2 newspapers, which at the time were willing to point out one of the big social changes that was taking place in Britain, that our welfare state was going very much to the bad. It wasn't going at all as anybody intended it to, not Beveridge, not Attlee, not anybody.
Okay, I'm getting towards the question, sorry, so
we had up to
time.
3 million unemployed as opposed to less than 1 million, only a couple of decades before. Yep. Invalidity benefit was going up. None of this was being pointed out by other newspapers except the Sunday Times. And the reason it wasn't being pointed out, the reason we need the Daily Mail, rather than wanting to get rid of it, is that other newspapers are too politically correct, too busy showing how virtuous they are, to point out and be honest about major things happening in our country. And that is the indictment of The Guardian, even The Telegraph and The Times, and these other politically correct newspapers. The Mail had the courage to say what was really happening.
Thank you very much. Very, very good. Gentleman was over here somewhere who had...
Is that one
so sorry, I've completely... There he is, yes,
Yeah.
sir, there he is.
Isn't the problem with Britain not the newspaper, the Daily Mail, but the lobbies, the secret lobbies that control our vulnerable leaders? Peter's exposed these in the past, the arms lobby, particularly the Israeli lobby, but he hasn't mentioned them this time. It's not the paper that's doing that's taking us into war and that sort of thing. It's those lobbies behind the scenes.
Okay.
I don't read the Daily Mail, except on one occasion when they demonized me as a Nazi for supporting the Palestinians.
Okay. Lady up there.
Oh, hello.
Just let that hanging in the air, sorry. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi. Is it on? Oh, right. I think the Daily Mail runs good campaigns, but the contradiction for the Daily Mail is how you write. Behind you, on the screen, is a banner headline which totally exemplifies what your argument is about. George Clooney's fiancée, Kamal, looks stylish in striking red dress and fetching floral heels at Sexual Violence Summit. What is important here? A lawyer attends a sexual violence summit, or the colour of her shoes, and the nature of her shoes and the colour of her dress. Is that not the Daily Mail totally undermining itself?
Thank you very much. So, Zoe, let's kick off with this issue that, frankly, if it wasn't for the anti-establishment nature of the Daily Mail, it would all be a cosy North London chat-a-thon between people who broadly agree with each other and all go to each other's houses for parties.
Look, there's a lot of... There is...
Which we all do, obviously.
There are a lot of media verities which aren't true. There's a lot of kind of casual acceptance of norms, which, you know, the Financial Times will be talking across the columnising to the Times columnists. But, you know, James's point about the Daily Mail telling this truth, he tells your truth. He doesn't, it tells your truth. It doesn't tell my truth. I don't think the problem with this country is people claiming disability benefits. I don't think the problem with wages in this country is that benefits were too high, so people stopped working. I think these are preposterous nonsense, diversions from the real nature of the problem, a corporate capture of wages in which the business sector was never taken on by the politicians and the unions were toothless.
Yeah, but so you may disagree with the argument.
I do disagree.
But the point that's being made is that it raises arguments before they become part of the mainstream establishment debate and therefore put it on the agenda in a way that is a very important part of our democratic kind of system.
Look, you can, if you so wish, say nobody was saying this poisonous thing previously, therefore the person who says the poisonous thing is a very important voice. I would prefer a world in which nobody had to say fake disability claimants were the cause of our financial woes, because I think it's absolutely untrue. It fosters hatred and violence, and it's nonsense diversion stuff. Now, obviously, a lot of this, I have huge problems with the mainstream and the accepted norms of the mainstream. I think The Guardian says a lot of things that you wouldn't hear in other newspapers. You wouldn't agree with very many of them. I wouldn't make the case for The Guardian on that basis. The fact is that the Overton window, which I guess you're talking about in terms of what the media considers itself allowed to say, is in a very, very right-wing place at the moment. It's more right-wing than I've ever known in my life. And that is as a result of 20 years toxin from that newspaper. Am I allowed to do the sexist language as well?
Yes. Yep.
You know, this ferociously moral paper that can only talk about women in terms of what she's wearing. I have to say, if The Guardian were that embarrassed about The Guardian's website, the Daily Mail would have a field day. We were like, oh, different publisher, only a certain amount of editorial crossover, nothing to do with us, Gov.
I didn't say it was embarrassed by it. I said it was different.
Yeah, okay.
I said it was different.
Okay, you were absolutely embarrassed. Look, it's a wow.
I think this is
it's a relentless trivialization is the problem. So I don't think it is very moral. I don't think it is moral to talk about women in terms of their cleavage constantly. I don't think it is moral to diminish a whole half of your population and reduce them to what they're wearing and what their eyebrows look like. I don't think that is moral.
Peter, can I ask you about this question of language, the question that was raised by the lady on the balcony, that this type of writing undermines the position of serious, professional men, women, whatever it may be, but particularly women, that the way the Mail approaches language is actually very important and has an insidious effect upon how the country approaches particularly often professional women.
I notice that the way that male politicians dress and conduct themselves is a matter of constant debate, not just in the Mail.
Yeah, but it's not the same relationship. There's a power relationship when it comes to those type of issues with women and the way they look.
I had this great debate, by the way, about how the leader of the opposition dressed, raised by the Conservative Prime Minister. I thought it was wrong to do so. But these are issues which nobody challenges the notion that Mrs. Clooney is a first-rate, very important lawyer. All right, Theresa May, her heels are a part of her image. It's a fact of life, and one of the ways. And all papers do this, by the way, but the Mail is, and I think this is something which is really important, and I really believe in. It's popular journalism. It's written for people to read it, and politics is not just about human rights. Even it's not just about very serious, turgid blocks of prose. It's got to be humanised. That's my. By the way, can I just make one other point, which really annoys me? You both the other side go on about accuracy and inaccuracy. Zoe Williams just made two statements which are completely untrue. And she's creating straw men. She said, the problem with this, the Mail says, the problem with this country is that people claim benefits. The Mail never said that. We strongly support the welfare state. We fight for the welfare state. And the fake disabilities are the cause of our financial worries. The Mail doesn't say that either. You mustn't claim things which the Mail doesn't say in order to attack them. If you want to have a serious discussion about the Mail, you must be serious. You mustn't misrepresent what the Mail does.
I think you only read your own column.
I can tell you one thing. You clearly don't read the Daily Mail, Zoe Williams.
I read it religiously.
Peter, 1 second. Don't undermine your arguments. Richard, yes, come in, please, please.
Just on the factual inaccuracy one, if I have made any factual inaccuracies, please put me right and I'll absolutely withdraw them. But on that factual inaccuracy one, I had a look at the figures for submissions to the PCC, I think it was 2013 or 2014. The leading newspaper complained against for inaccuracy and misreporting the rest of it was the Daily Mail with nearly 700 submissions. Number 2 was the Sun with very slightly more than half that amount. The Guardian had 115.
Yeah, look,
So Peter, so the numbers there, and then we'll go to the gentleman there. Yep, gentleman there, and there's another gentleman there's someone over there as well. Brilliant. Yeah, we'll take one up there. Yes, sir.
Hello. I don't. Oh, is it working? Sorry. I wanted to ask the two guys. I'm sorry, I can't read the names from here. But the two guys that were for the Daily Mail, just to ask. I think we've all talked about the fact that as a tone of voice, it can be very hyperbolic, and that's successful. You change laws, you raise money for charity, you invoke a response. The question I have for you as individuals who are clearly intelligent journalists is to say the same language and style that you take into the other side, the news reporting side of your business. Would you not see the challenge in trying to educate people and make them better, to the point that the other two were saying, educate solutions for them, rather than taking that shouty attitude of we will make the most noise and get the most movement behind what we can say? Isn't it better to try and educate and empower and enrich, make people better, rather than take that shouty version of everything you approach very singularly has to make the most noise, make the biggest impact, be the most dramatic?
Thank you very much. Sorry, on the balcony, yeah. And there's a chap down here.
Hi.
Yes.
I hate to point out the obvious, but isn't the point of a newspaper to sell? And that's what the Daily Mail does. I mean, they're not there to educate or to change anyone's opinions. They are there to sell papers, and that's what they do very, very well. So I think we all have to recognise that it is what the people want to read.
Okay, thank you very much. Sir, yes. Well, David Bond, in fact. Yes, hello.
Good evening. And can I congratulate Roger
Used to
on...
work on the tunnel. Yeah.
Can I congratulate Roger on getting to 8:24 before swearing publicly? Congratulations on that. My question is for both sides, really, and is... How is it that a paper which is perceived to be so nasty about women is read by so many women?
Yeah. Zoe, well, Roger, 1 second. I'm the chair. You're not my boss anymore. Zoe, why is it that so many women read the Daily Mail?
Well, I think people do like to have their anxieties whipped up. I mean, there is a kind of peculiar masochistic thrill in it, and that's why that is why I read it quite religiously. There is a kind of, you do think, oh my God, am I really infertile by the age of 30? It can't be true. Tell me it's not true. Of course it's not true. So there is it does kind of stimulate anxiety, and I do think that makes it fun, but in quite a dark way.
Roger, well, let me ask you that question first about why you think so many women read the Daily Mail, but also this notion from the gentleman at the back that the tone of the Daily Mail is shouting and aggressive, and therefore whips up bad feeling amongst your readers and maybe the population more broadly, and that actually it would be a much better approach to your big, large readership if your tone was more educative, more solutions, and more kind of let's all just be a bit nicer to each other, rather than doing everything almost as if you've got the caps lock on constantly on your screen, and you're all sitting there banging out furiously how angry you are.
Well, we do have all the caps lock on. And that's why the headlines are quite short, quite difficult to write. And it is, but attitude, I mean, my only point about that is it's about attitude. It's a paper with attitude. It's good to have attitude. It's not going to be the Times of 1927, the great columns of Time. It's a different thing. It's a popular paper. It has to sell. And it's not an educational tool. You look at the stuff in there. It's brilliant letters pages, great criticism, brilliant sport. It's a fantastically varied thing, full of different voices. It's not one sort of monolith, and that's why the sort of tenor of a lot of this conversation is so amazing. And that's what Bond is saying about women. Women like it because it's got lots of stories that appeal to women. I'm not a woman, so I'm a woman. Not recently, but it has health. It has health. Very good health stories. It's got diet stories. It's got stories about other women. Women like it. Women like it. I'm sorry.
Women like it. Lovely.
Oh,
Lovely.
shut up.
There's another one from the balcony up there. And no, you've had a question already. And then there's a gentleman here. These are the last three. 'Cause I think I've got the thrilling. Oh no, we've got the closing statements to do quickly. Okay, 3 quick points. So sorry. Lady there, yeah. And then one from the balcony. Yeah, just 3 quick points. So sorry, we're running out of time.
I just wanted to make the point that what you're saying, that newspapers are there, I think she's gone now actually, newspapers are there to be sold, and I don't dispute that, it is a business. But sometimes with the Daily Mail, it's not the topic that they're talking about, but the way they talk about it. And I sit there and I do read it sometimes, but I never buy it, basically. I feel that the person who's writing, journalists have a responsibility to understand that what they write informs people's opinions. And I sometimes think the Daily Mail forgets that.
Okay, great. Gentleman here. And then there's one, if it's a different person up there, it's not the same person just trying to pretend they're someone else. I hope not. Quickly, sir here. Yep, this man here.
I have a question to Zoe Williams.
Yeah.
Do you agree that the attitude to Daily Mail is for majority of people, the attitude to Daily Mail is the reflection of attitude to the people who read the Daily Mail, to its readers? So if saying that the trouble with this country is the Daily Mail, would it be expression of intolerance to these people who read the Daily Mail? Yeah. Would it be claiming that you're the trouble of our country? Because you're saying that, yes. So
great. Gentleman here, 1 quick point, and then one more from the balcony, and then we'll go to the closing speeches. Quickly. Okay. Yeah, sir.
One of the reasons why I personally think that people like myself read the Daily Mail is that they never presume to say what people like me, a British Asian, would believe based on their skin colour, for example. And I think that may also apply to women, where I think the Guardian are quite subject to that, where they might say, because you are women, you have to think in this way, you have to vote for this political party. And I think I think the Daily Mail just does not do that. Condescendingly racist, I would say.
Okay, thank you. And one more point from there, and then we'll go to closing statements. Yes?
No, I want to say about Richard Littlejohn.
Sorry?
Richard Littlejohn. I want to congratulate him about his writing. He's
fabulous. He's not here, but we'll pass it on. Well done. Right, so we're slightly over time. So I'm gonna ask for a quick summation. 1 minute only. 1 minute only. And we're going to go in reverse order. So, Peter, a quick summation against the trouble with this country. No, from your chair, Peter.
Oh, from my chair.
No to waste time. A quick summation. The trouble with this, against the motion that the trouble with this country is the Daily Mail.
Yeah, just to answer the Reverend Coles' point about complaints. Complaints are, in many ways, a good thing. They're showing you're being provocative, you're doing difficult journalism. And I don't know how many complaints we get, but the key, and I stress that quite a lot, but the key thing is upheld complaints. That is the key one, which are upheld by the industry regulator, IPSO. And the Mail actually comes quite low on that. The Telegraph, recent figures show the Telegraph as being the most upheld complaints, following, I believe, by the NI News International, and only then
Northern and Shell.
Northern and Shell, and then and Daily Mail does quite well, does very well.
Okay, Peter, just quick summation. There's not points about other stuff, but yeah, go on.
Well, and I think the lady on the left that raised this fascinating point about, is it the Daily Mail or the readers? Look, it's a symbiotic relationship. It's a paper that we, the Daily Mail, takes the readers really, really seriously. It's not a metropolitan paper. It's a paper which goes out of its way to write for ordinary, decent people of this country. And I think it does it brilliantly well. I think it's humane. I think it's remarkably tolerant. But it isn't afraid to go into difficult areas which are controversial.
Thank you very much, Peter. Zoe, 1 minute. I'm going to be like Hugh Edwards.
Okay, this idea about in castigating the Daily Mail, you're secretly hating their readers and furthermore being snobbish towards their readers because the paper itself is cheap, ergo you don't like people who only spend 60p on their newspaper. It's nonsense. It's a very common complaint on the right to call an attitude, a Guardian reader's attitude, but I don't think we do conflate the paper with the readers, and I certainly don't conflate the Daily Mail with the readers of the Daily Mail, otherwise I would be in a state of perpetual depression. It's the readers, you know, just as Peak Guardian was reached in the headline, quinoa eaters should be wary of what it's doing to Bolivian rainforests, and very few Guardian readers would have actually written that. I don't think the excesses of the Daily Mail, which are contributing to the dishevelment of the political culture, are shared by the readers. I don't think they are, and I furthermore think that the Daily Mail, nobody speaks more to other members of the media than the Daily Mail. And you see now a kind of normalisation of unpleasantness in the way Muslims are treated in headlines, in the way women are treated as chattel. That 20 years ago, you would never have seen a Times headline as casually racist as a Daily Mail headline. But the Daily Mail has really percolated through the media class, and it's really changed it's really changed what's considered normal.
Thank you, Zoe. Roger. 1 minute.
Sorry, I think that the point I tried to make about this paper, the point James Bartholomew made over there, is you've got an extraordinarily brave editor, drives the paper. He's been a remarkable time that's quite indefatigable. It's a great honour to work for him. It's a great honour to produce a paper that is widely admired all over the industry and in the public. There is nothing racist about anybody on the paper. There's nothing racist about any of the headlines that are written. I think you might have been referring to the Times there. I beg you to defeat this motion. It is absolute nonsense, and it implies a restriction on freedom of expression, and at this time above all is what you need. We need the ability to say things, explore things, and go down difficult paths. Please overthrow this motion. It's a great newspaper, I beg you.
Thank you, Roger. Richard.
Well,
final point.
I have to say I was always a bit lukewarm about the motion anyway, really, and I feel even more lukewarm about it now because I think a very stout defence from Roger and from Peter, and I only said yes to get out of bell ringing. But when trying to think about the case I could make in support of the motion, I remember something somebody told me, a friend of mine who worked for the Daily Mail a few years ago now, and she told me when she was hired, the bloke said to her, just remember, everything you write must leave our readers more angry or more frightened than they were before.
Thank you very much. Well, after such a robust and brilliant debate, the votes are in from you magnificent audience. Let's just remember that where we were at the beginning of this, it was for the motion 40%, against the motion 27%, undecided 33%. The final result is 51% for the motion, 48% against. Unlucky chaps, but you lose.
Oh. But they want the swing.
The swing was 5%. The swing was 5% to my left, not politically, but just geographically.
Yeah. I think they won. I think that's their victory.
So, on the left, although the motion was carried, the swing went to the left. Does that make them the winner of the debate?
I think that makes them a winner.
Exciting. So everyone is a winner, which is a lovely way to finish. Thank you very, very much to Peter Oborne, Roger Alton, Zoe Williams and Richard Coles. Thank you to you for coming as well.